For as long as I could remember, I had always believed in the simple philosophy of live and let live. Mind your business, and I'll mind mine. It was a mantra that had served me well for the past 5 years in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Heights. Nestled in the heart of the Midwest, Maplewood Heights was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, but respected each other's privacy. The streets were lined with mature oak trees, and the houses, though varied in style, all shared a certain charm that spoke of a community that valued harmony over uniformity. I had moved to Maplewood Heights after a messy divorce, seeking a fresh start. At 42, I was starting over, and the modest Cape Cod-style house I purchased on Elm Street felt like the perfect place to rebuild my life. The house was small but cozy, with a front porch that overlooked a well-manicured lawn and a backyard that was just big enough for a garden. It was a far cry from the sprawling suburban mansion I had shared with my ex-wife. But it was mine, and that was all that mattered. For 5 years, life in Maplewood Heights was peaceful. My neighbors were friendly but not intrusive, and the Homeowners Association, HOA, was relatively hands-off. The HOA meetings were held quarterly, and the discussions were usually about mundane topics like lawn care, trash pickup schedules, and the occasional community potluck. The HOA president, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Thompson, was a kind and reasonable woman who believed in fostering a sense of community without being overbearing. But all of that changed when Margaret announced her retirement and a new HOA president was elected. Her name was Victoria Kensington. Victoria arrived in Maplewood Heights like a hurricane, uprooting the tranquility that had defined the neighborhood for years. She was in her early 50s, with perfectly coiffed auburn hair, designer clothes, and a Mercedes-Benz SUV that gleamed like a trophy. She had purchased the largest house in the development, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that had been on the market for over a year due to its exorbitant price tag. From the moment she moved in, it was clear that Victoria had big plans for Maplewood Heights. Within weeks of her arrival, Victoria began attending every HOA meeting, questioning every financial decision, and suggesting sweeping changes to the community's standards. She spoke with an air of authority that left little room for dissent, and it wasn't long before she had positioned herself as the de facto leader of the neighborhood. When Margaret stepped down, Victoria ran for the position of HOA president unopposed. Most of us didn't think much of it at the time. After all, how much damage could one person do? As it turned out, quite a lot. My name is Daniel Harper, and by the time Victoria Kensington became HOA president, I had been living in Maplewood Heights for 5 peaceful years. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which allowed me to work from home and enjoy the quiet rhythms of suburban life. My days were spent designing logos and websites for clients, while my evenings were reserved for tending to my garden or taking long walks around the neighborhood. For the most part, I kept to myself. My neighbors were friendly, but I wasn't one to engage in lengthy conversations or attend every community event. I valued my privacy, and for the most part, my neighbors respected that. But all of that changed when Victoria took over the HOA. The trouble started with something seemingly trivial: the color of my front door. When I had bought the house, the exterior was painted a soft, neutral beige with white trim. It was a classic look that fit well with the Cape Cod style of the house. But after 5 years, the paint was starting to fade, and I decided it was time for a refresh. I spent weeks browsing paint samples, eventually settling on a deep, rich navy blue for the front door. It was a subtle change, but one that I thought would give the house a more modern, updated look. Following the HOA's protocol, I submitted a formal paint color request, complete with exact swatches and product codes. According to the bylaws, if the HOA didn't respond within 21 days, the request was automatically approved. 3 weeks passed without a word from the HOA, so I assumed my request had been approved. I hired a painter, spent a small fortune, and had the front door repainted. The result was stunning. The navy blue door popped against the beige exterior, and several neighbors complimented the update. But 2 days later, disaster struck. A bright orange violation notice was taped to my front door. It stated that I had made an unauthorized exterior modification and that I had 14 days to restore the original color or face daily fines of $100. I was confused. I had followed the proper procedures, and according to the bylaws, my request should have been automatically approved. I called the number listed on the notice and found myself speaking directly to Victoria Kensington. This must be a mistake, I explained. I submitted the color change request over a month ago and never received a denial. According to the bylaws, that constitutes automatic approval. Mr. Harper, Victoria replied, her voice dripping with condescension. I reviewed your application personally. The color you've painted your door is navy blue, not beige. And navy blue is not on the approved color palette for Maplewood Heights. The difference is minimal, I countered. And the bylaws state that if a color is within 2 shades of an approved color, it falls within acceptable parameters. That's your interpretation, Victoria snapped. As HOA president, I have final say on aesthetic matters, and I've determined that your door color is not compliant. You have 14 days to repaint it to the original color. I followed the procedures and received automatic approval through non-response. I insisted. I'm not repainting a perfectly good door that's already cost me thousands of dollars. Then prepare for fines of $100 per day after the 14-day grace period, she replied crisply. And Mr. Harper, I suggest you check the newly updated bylaws. The automatic approval clause was removed last month. I hung up the phone, my heart racing. I immediately checked the HOA website, and sure enough, there had been a quiet update to the bylaws. The automatic approval clause had been replaced with language granting the board president discretionary authority on all aesthetic decisions. I was furious. Not only had Victoria changed the rules without notifying the homeowners, but she had done so in a way that gave her complete control over the neighborhood's appearance. Over the next few days, I researched my options and discovered that under state law, HOA bylaw changes required proper notice to all homeowners and usually a vote. I drafted a formal appeal letter, citing the relevant statutes, and hand-delivered copies to each HOA board member, including Victoria. I also reached out to a few neighbors, many of whom were equally concerned once I pointed out the stealthy bylaw changes. It seemed that Victoria had been making unilateral decisions without consulting the board or the homeowners, and her heavy-handed approach was starting to rub people the wrong way. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. While I was away on a 3-day business trip to Chicago, my neighbor, a retired nurse named Evelyn, kept an eye on my house. When I returned late Friday evening, she hurried over as I pulled into my driveway. "Daniel, thank goodness you're back," she said, her expression troubled. "Something strange has been going on. Victoria has been circling your house multiple times a day, taking photos and making notes. Yesterday, she brought some men in a white van to look at your exterior. They were discussing paint samples. Too tired to process this fully, I thanked Evelyn and went inside to unpack. I assumed Victoria was gathering evidence or documenting the violation more thoroughly. I decided to deal with it in the morning. But Saturday morning brought a scene straight out of a surreal nightmare. At 10:30 a.m., as I sipped coffee and caught up on emails, my doorbell rang. It was Evelyn again, looking flustered. "Daniel, you need to come outside right now. Victoria is here with a painting crew, and they're setting up ladders against your house." I rushed outside in my pajama pants and t-shirt to find an incredible spectacle unfolding. Victoria, dressed in crisp white capri pants and a baby blue polo shirt, was directing 2 men in painter's coveralls who were indeed setting up equipment alongside my house. A van labeled Premier Painting Professionals was parked in my driveway, and several buckets of paint were lined up on my lawn. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, walking straight up to Victoria. She turned, not even having the grace to look embarrassed. "Mr. Harper, you were informed that your door color is non-compliant. The 14-day grace period expired yesterday, and as per Section 12.4 of the bylaws, the HOA now has the right to remedy violations and bill the homeowner for the cost." "I filed an appeal," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "And I was out of town on business, which you would know if you'd bothered to check before sending painters to trespass on my property." "Your appeal was denied," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "And your travel plans are not the HOA's concern. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to get started. The original beige color will be restored by the end of the day." "This is illegal," I stated flatly. "You cannot just show up and paint someone's house without their consent. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Victoria replied with a smirk. "I've already spoken with the county sheriff's office about enforcing our bylaws. They're well aware that HOAs have the legal right to remedy violations. As this confrontation unfolded, a small crowd of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, watching with expressions ranging from disbelief to concern. My next-door neighbor, a lawyer named Greg who worked for the district attorney's office, was filming the interaction on his phone. "Victoria," Greg called out, walking over to join us. "I've reviewed the bylaws pretty thoroughly, and I don't see any provision that allows for this kind of action without a court order. Section 12.4 clearly states, it states that the HOA can hire contractors to remedy certain violations after due process and proper notice," Greg interrupted. "But it specifically lists landscaping, trash removal, and broken fixtures. House painting is not included. And furthermore, there's a requirement for a formal hearing before the board, which hasn't occurred." Victoria's face flushed. "As president, I have emergency enforcement powers." "No, you don't," another voice chimed in. It was Raj Patel, a fellow HOA board member. "Victoria, the board never approved this action. You can't unilaterally decide to paint someone's house." I seized the moment. "Gentlemen," I addressed the painters, "I appreciate that you've been hired for a job, but I am the legal owner of this property, and I do not consent to any painting. If you proceed, it will constitute trespassing and vandalism, and I will press charges." The painters exchanged uncertain glances between me and Victoria. "We were told this was authorized," one of them said hesitantly. "It's not," I stated firmly. "And I have witnesses and video evidence that I have explicitly denied permission." Greg held up his phone meaningfully, still recording. The lead painter turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, we can't proceed if the homeowner objects. It's against company policy and potentially illegal. We'll need to reschedule until this is resolved." Victoria's face contorted with anger. "I've put down a non-refundable deposit. Your company assured me you could handle this job today." "We can handle painting," the painter replied calmly. "But we don't get involved in property disputes. You'll need to sort this out and call us when everyone's on the same page." With that, the painters began packing up their equipment. Victoria turned to me, fury evident in every line of her face. "This isn't over, Harper. The fines start today, $100 per day until your house is compliant." "Actually," Raj interjected, "as treasurer of the board, I can't authorize any fines without a majority vote, which hasn't happened. And Victoria, we need to have a serious conversation about your actions today." As the painters drove away and the neighbors continued to watch the drama unfold, Victoria stormed off to her car, slamming the door with enough force to make everyone wince. The gathered neighbors slowly dispersed, many stopping to express their support for me and their concerns about Victoria's leadership. Greg approached me, shaking his head. "That was something else. You know, if she had actually started painting, it would have been criminal property damage." "I can't believe she thought this would work," I replied, still somewhat in shock. "Power goes to some people's heads," Greg said. "Listen, I'd suggest installing some security cameras if you don't already have them. I wouldn't put it past her to try something when you're not around." It was excellent advice, and I acted on it immediately. That afternoon, I purchased and installed a comprehensive security camera system that covered all sides of my house, driveway, and front porch. The system sent alerts to my phone when it detected motion and stored footage in the cloud. I made sure the cameras were visible enough to serve as a deterrent, but discreet enough not to be an eyesore. The next day, Raj called to inform me that he had called an emergency board meeting to address Victoria's actions. He asked if I would attend to present my side of the situation, which I agreed to do. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening at the community center. In the meantime, I continued to document everything: daily photos of my house, saved emails and notices, and a detailed log of every interaction. I also printed out the relevant state laws regarding HOA governance and bylaw modifications. On Tuesday afternoon, my security system sent an alert to my phone while I was working. The front camera showed Victoria standing on my porch, placing another notice on my door. I waited until she left, then checked the notice. Another violation, this time claiming my front garden beds were not properly maintained and required immediate attention. The beds were immaculate, with fresh mulch I'd put down just last month. Later that same afternoon, I received 3 more security alerts. Each time, it was Victoria walking around my property, taking photos with her phone. On her final circuit, She spent several minutes examining my newly installed security cameras. Her expression soured when she realized their presence. She looked directly into one camera, and I swear I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she realized she was being recorded. Wednesday evening arrived, and the community center was packed for the emergency board meeting. It seemed word had spread about the attempted forced painting, and homeowners were keenly interested in the outcome. The 5-member board sat at a table at the front of the room, with Victoria in the center as president. She looked composed but tense, dressed in a conservative pantsuit as if for battle. Raj called the meeting to order and explained its purpose: to address concerns about recent enforcement actions taken by the HOA president without board approval. He then invited me to speak. I presented my case calmly and methodically, sticking to the facts. I explained my proper submission of the paint color change, the lack of timely response constituting automatic approval under the bylaws that were in effect at the time, and the subsequent unannounced changes to those bylaws. I detailed Victoria's escalating actions, culminating in the attempt to paint my house without consent. I presented my documentation, including Greg's video of the confrontation, which was played for everyone to see. The room was silent as they watched Victoria on the screen, clearly stating her intention to paint my house against my explicit objections. When the video ended, there was a murmur of disapproval from the assembly. Then came the moment that changed everything. I played footage from my security cameras, showing Victoria's multiple visits to my property, clearly trespassing as she wandered around my yard, taking photos. The timestamp showed she had been there as recently as that morning, when I was at a coffee shop working remotely. What was most concerning, I concluded, was discovering this on my security footage from yesterday afternoon. I played the final clip, which showed Victoria approaching my garage with what appeared to be a small can and a brush in her hand. She looked around furtively, then opened the can and painted a small patch of navy blue on my previously pristine white garage door. She took a photo of it, then quickly walked away. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Victoria shot to her feet. "That's doctored footage," she shouted. "He's manipulated that video to frame me." Raj called for order, his face grave. "Victoria, the metadata on these video files can be verified by experts if necessary. Are you denying that's you in the footage?" "I was conducting an inspection," she insisted. "As for the paint, I was merely taking a sample to match for color compliance purposes." "By painting it onto my garage door?" I asked incredulously. Greg stood up from the audience. "As an officer of the court, I feel obligated to point out that what we just witnessed on that video constitutes criminal vandalism and potentially filing a false report, since Victoria subsequently issued a violation notice for damage she herself caused." Another board member, a quiet man named Tom who rarely spoke at meetings, cleared his throat. "I move that we immediately suspend Victoria from her position as president, pending a full investigation of these allegations." "Second," said the 4th board member, Lisa. "This is absurd." Victoria protested. "I've done nothing but try to maintain our community standards and property values." Raj called for a vote. For hands went up in favor of suspension. Only Victoria's remained down. "The motion carries," Raj announced. "Victoria Kensington is suspended from the position of HOA president, effective immediately. As vice president, I will assume temporary leadership until this matter is resolved." Victoria grabbed her purse and stormed out of the meeting, but not before turning to deliver a parting shot. "You'll all regret this when your property values plummet because people like him," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "are allowed to paint their houses whatever garish colors they want." The door slammed behind her, and there was a moment of awkward silence before Raj continued the meeting. The board voted to rescind all violation notices issued by Victoria in the past 30 days, pending review, restore the original bylaws until proper procedures for amendments could be followed, and form a committee to review the HOA's governance structure. As the meeting adjourned, numerous neighbors approached me to express their support and share their own stories of run-ins with Victoria. It seemed she had been on quite the violation spree since taking office, targeting everything from the wrong shade of mailbox to unauthorized bird feeders. The following week was surprisingly quiet. Victoria's suspension had been formalized in a letter from the HOA's attorney, barring her from acting in any official capacity. I fixed the small patch of paint she had applied to my garage door and my security cameras detected no further trespasses. 10 days after the meeting, Greg knocked on my door one evening. "Thought you'd want to know," he said without preamble. "Victoria is being charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. The DA's office decided to pursue it after reviewing your footage and similar complaints from 3 other homeowners who apparently also had security cameras. One caught her removing slats from their fence to create a violation. I was surprised the authorities had taken it so seriously. I just wanted her to leave me alone, not necessarily end up with a criminal record." Greg shrugged. "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. But if it makes you feel better, she'll probably get a plea deal with community service and restitution. The real punishment for someone like Victoria is the public embarrassment." He was right about that. The local community paper ran a small story about an HOA president facing charges for falsifying violations, which was then picked up by one of those viral homeowner nightmare websites. Though Victoria wasn't named in the articles, everyone in Maplewood Heights knew who it was about. 3 weeks later, Victoria's Tudor house had a "for sale" sign in the front yard. Under Raj's level-headed leadership, the HOA underwent significant restructuring. The bylaws were simplified, the violation process was made more transparent with multiple levels of review, and a new online system allowed homeowners to track the status of any architectural requests or complaints in real time. I was asked to join the new Architectural Review Committee, which I accepted on the condition that we create a more diverse and contemporary approved color palette. The committee agreed, and we spent a productive Saturday with a professional color consultant, creating an expanded range of options that respected the neighborhood's character while allowing for more personal expression. 6 months after the incident, Victoria's house finally sold for significantly less than she had paid for it. On moving day, I made a point of being outside, working in my yard, thinking she might want one final confrontation. Instead, she avoided eye contact, directing the movers with far less of her former imperious manner. As the moving truck pulled away, my neighbor Evelyn walked over from across the street. "Good riddance," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. Do you know what she told me when she first moved in? That my rose bushes were chaotic and I should consider something more structured, like boxwoods. My award-winning roses that I've been tending for 20 years. I laughed. Well, the new owners seem nice. A young couple with a baby on the way. They came by yesterday to introduce themselves and ask about the neighborhood. Did you warn them about the HOA? Evelyn asked with a wink. I told them it's under new management, I replied. Much more reasonable these days. Under Raj's leadership, the focus shifted from punitive enforcement to community building. The funds previously earmarked for violation processing were redirected to improving the playground and adding a community garden. The annual block party, which had dwindled in recent years, was revived with enthusiastic participation. As for my navy blue door, it became something of a symbol in Maplewood Heights, a reminder that sometimes you have to stand your ground against unreasonable authority. Several other homeowners, emboldened by my small act of resistance, submitted color change requests under the new expanded palette. Our once uniform neighborhood gradually developed more character and individuality, while still maintaining the overall harmony that protected our property values. I kept my security cameras installed, though they rarely captured anything more exciting than the occasional delivery person or wandering neighborhood cat. They served as a reminder that sometimes the best defense against overreach is simply paying attention and having evidence on your side. The following spring, I decided to paint my front door a bright, cheerful yellow, properly submitted and promptly approved by the Architectural Committee, of course. As I was applying the final coat, the new HOA president stopped by on his evening walk. Looking good, Daniel, Raj said, admiring the contrast against the navy blue. You know, if Victoria could see this, she'd probably have an aneurysm. I laughed, stepping back to check my work. Sometimes a little color is exactly what a neighborhood needs. Couldn't agree more, he replied. Hey, we're still looking for someone to chair the 4th of July picnic committee. If you're interested, I might be, I said, as long as there are no clipboard checklists involved. Raj chuckled. No clipboards, no power trips. Just neighbors enjoying each other's company. That's the kind of HOA I want to run. As he continued on his walk, I put the final touches on my yellow door, thinking about how differently things had turned out than Victoria had intended. She had tried to control every aspect of our community through fear and intimidation, only to unite us against her overreach. In trying to paint my house her way, she had inadvertently helped us create a more colorful, vibrant neighborhood than ever before. And the best part? It was all perfectly within the bylaws. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.